The wind howled through the desolate plains, swirling the snow into a relentless blizzard. The cold was bone-chilling, sinking deep into the earth and stealing the warmth from everything it touched. In the middle of this frozen wasteland stood a lone Mustang horse, his once majestic form now frail and trembling. His coat, once vibrant and wild, was now dulled by frost and caked with ice. His legs wobbled with each breath he took, his strength fading with the storm. The horse, now barely standing, had been left behind, abandoned without mercy. A rough rope, frayed and tight around his neck, told a silent story of betrayal. He had once been called Blaze, a name given by the rancher who once owned him. But now, he was just another soul forgotten in the storm. Hours earlier, Blaze had been unloaded from a rusted trailer by a man with no remorse. "You're more trouble than you're worth," the man grumbled, shoving Blaze toward the icy plains before driving off, leaving only tire tracks that quickly vanished beneath the snow. Blaze stood there, confused and scared, watching the truck disappear. His legs felt heavy, each step through the thick snow more difficult than the last. His body was thin, ribs protruding through his matted coat, and the sharp wind cut through him like knives. He lowered his head, closing his eyes against the icy wind. It was as if he had accepted his fate. But fate wasn't finished with Blaze. Miles away, Claire Bennett, a dedicated wildlife volunteer in her early 40s, was making her way home from a long day of delivering supplies to a nearby animal reserve. The blizzard had caught her by surprise. Her old pickup truck rattled and struggled against the thick snow. Claire's knuckles whitened as she gripped the steering wheel, her eyes squinting through the frosted windshield. Suddenly, something dark against the white caught her eye. She blinked, unsure if it was a trick of the storm. Slowing the truck, she leaned closer to the window, wiping away the condensation. There it was, a large, unmoving shape partially buried in the snow. Her heart skipped. "Is that a horse?" she whispered. Without hesitation, Claire pulled over, grabbed her thick winter coat and flashlight and stepped into the unforgiving cold. The wind tore at her face, but she pressed forward. The closer she got, the clearer the figure became. It was a horse, barely alive, its body shaking violently. Claire's breath caught in her throat. "Oh, you poor thing," she murmured. Kneeling beside the suffering animal, she cautiously reached out. Blaze flinched but was too weak to move away. Claire gently ran her hand over his ice-encrusted fur. The rope burns around his neck and the deep scars on his legs spoke volumes. "You've been through so much," she whispered. Claire knew she couldn't leave him there, but how could she possibly move a full-grown Mustang in this storm? Her mind raced. She sprinted back to her truck, grabbing an emergency blanket and some oats she kept for rescues. Returning to Blaze, she draped the blanket over his shivering body and placed the oats in front of him. "Come on, boy, you've got to try," she urged. Blaze sniffed the oats, hesitated, and then weakly took a bite. It wasn't much, but it was hope. Claire softly stroked his neck. "Hang on, okay? I'm not leaving you." She knew getting him into her truck would be nearly impossible alone, but giving up wasn't an option. Claire returned to the truck, rummaging for supplies, and found a makeshift harness she used for larger rescues. With careful hands, she looped it around Blaze. "I know this hurts, but we have to move," she coaxed. Step by agonizing step, Claire guided Blaze towards the truck. His legs wobbled, threatening to give out, but Claire shielded him from the worst of the wind. Finally, they reached the truck. Claire hastily fashioned a ramp using wooden planks from the truck bed. Blaze hesitated at the ramp, his legs trembling. "You can do this," Claire whispered. "Just a little more." Summoning every ounce of strength, Blaze slowly climbed the ramp and collapsed into the truck bed. Claire quickly secured him and threw another blanket over his fragile frame. Sliding into the driver's seat, Claire started the engine. "You're safe now," she whispered, glancing back at Blaze. "I don't know how, but I'm going to get you through this." The storm howled on, but Claire drove forward, gripping the wheel with steady determination. She knew time was running out, but she wouldn't let him down, not tonight. The blizzard roared on as Claire's truck rattled through the icy roads, its headlights barely piercing the dense wall of snow. In the back, Blaze lay motionless under the thick blankets, his shallow breaths barely visible in the cold air. Claire's grip tightened on the steering wheel, her mind racing. She couldn't lose him now. Claire's cabin wasn't far, but the storm made every mile feel like an eternity. The narrow road twisted through the snow-covered forest, and Claire navigated it with steady focus. She glanced in the rearview mirror, checking on Blaze. "Hold on, boy, we're almost there." Finally, the cabin's faint outline appeared through the snow, a small wooden structure nestled between towering pine trees. Claire pulled up to the front porch, the truck groaning as it stopped. Without wasting a second, she grabbed her flashlight and rushed to the truck bed. Blaze didn't move. No, stay with me," Claire pleaded. She carefully adjusted the harness around his body, speaking softly to him. "Come on, Blaze, just a little more." With every ounce of strength, she guided him off the truck and toward the cabin. His hooves struggled against the ice, but he leaned into her support, inching forward. Inside, the cabin was warm, the fireplace crackling with life. Claire had prepared a makeshift bed of thick quilts and hay in the corner of the living room. She eased Blaze down onto the soft bedding, covering him with more blankets. The warmth of the cabin seemed to coax a weak sigh from him. Claire wasted no time. She grabbed towels and began gently drying the ice and snow from Blaze's fur. His skin was raw in places, and the deep scars around his neck were clearer now. Tears welled in Claire's eyes. "Who could do this to you?" she whispered. She carefully cleaned his wounds and applied a soothing balm. Blaze flinched but didn't resist. His eyes, though clouded with exhaustion, followed Claire's every movement. In the kitchen, Claire warmed up water and mixed in electrolytes, pouring it into a large bowl. She returned to Blaze's side and carefully lifted his head, encouraging him to drink. "Come on, Blaze, please." After a long pause, he lapped at the water slowly, each sip seeming to restore a flicker of life. "That's it, boy. Keep going." Hours passed. Claire stayed by Blaze's side, whispering comfort and checking his breathing. She fed him small bites of mashed oats soaked in broth, careful not to overwhelm his fragile body. The fire's warmth filled the room, casting a soft glow over them both. Blaze's breathing began to steady. His body, once shivering violently, was now still. Claire leaned back in her chair, exhaustion tugging at her, but she refused to sleep. Her eyes remained fixed on Blaze. As dawn broke, pale light filtered through the frosted windows. Claire blinked against the soft glow and noticed something that filled her with cautious hope. Blaze was awake. His head was lifted slightly, and though weak, his eyes were brighter than before. Claire smiled, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Good morning, fighter," she whispered. Blaze blinked slowly, his breathing calm. Later that morning, Claire knew Blaze needed professional care. She dialed Dr. Harper, the trusted local veterinarian. "Claire?" Dr. Harper's voice was thick with sleep. "I need your help," Claire said urgently. "I have a Mustang. He's badly injured and malnourished. I did what I could, but he needs medical attention." "Bring him in," Dr. Harper replied immediately. "I'll prepare everything." Claire bundled Blaze as best she could, guiding him gently back into the truck. The morning light revealed the full extent of his injuries: deep scars, matted fur, and visible ribs. Yet, there was something different now, a spark of life. The drive to the clinic was smoother with the storm now behind them. Blaze rested quietly, his head occasionally lifting to glance at Claire. "Hang in there, boy. Help is coming." At the clinic, Dr. Harper and her assistant rushed to help. They carefully led Blaze inside, marveling at his condition. "It's a miracle he's alive," Dr. Harper murmured, beginning the examination. Blaze was given IV fluids, antibiotics, and thorough wound care. Dr. Harper examined the rope scars on his neck, shaking her head. Someone left him for dead. Claire sat close, her hand resting gently on Blaze's neck. "Not anymore," she whispered. Dr. Harper looked up. "You're keeping him, aren't you?" Claire smiled softly. "If he'll have me." Blaze closed his eyes, his body finally relaxing. For the first time, he was safe. Days passed slowly but steadily at the clinic. The sterile white walls contrasted with the warmth of Claire's unwavering presence by Blaze's side. His condition remained fragile, but the determined Mustang was fighting. IV fluids trickled into his veins, and the antibiotics began working to heal his infections. Blaze's breathing, once shallow and ragged, grew deeper and more even. Dr. Harper worked tirelessly, monitoring Blaze's progress and treating his wounds. "He's tough," she said one afternoon, checking his vitals, "but he's not out of the woods yet." Claire gently stroked Blaze's muzzle. "Neither am I," she murmured, "but we'll get through this. Together." Blaze's recovery was slow but visible. His eyes, once dull and defeated, now carried a quiet strength. He began lifting his head more often, cautiously observing his surroundings. His appetite returned little by little, and Claire fed him small, soft meals, oats soaked in warm broth and fresh water. Dr. Harper noted the changes. "He's responding well, Claire. A few more days and I think he'll be ready to go home." Claire's heart swelled. Home. It wasn't just her cabin anymore. It was Blaze's home, too. The first moment Blaze stood on his own legs was nothing short of miraculous. Claire had been gently encouraging him to move, supporting his weight with the harness. One chilly morning, as the sunlight streamed through the clinic windows, Blaze shifted and slowly pushed himself up. Claire gasped softly, hands ready to steady him, but she didn't interfere. Blaze wobbled, his legs shaking under his own weight, but he was standing on his own. Claire's eyes welled with tears. "That's it, Blaze. You're stronger than they ever knew." Dr. Harper, watching from the doorway, smiled. "He's got your stubbornness." Claire laughed softly. "Takes one to know one." When Dr. Harper finally cleared Blaze to return home, Claire prepared the cabin with care. She set up a large insulated shelter near the stable with thick bedding and blankets. She stocked up on fresh hay and special feeds to continue Blaze's recovery. The drive back felt different this time. The storm was long gone, and the sky stretched wide and blue above them. Blaze lifted his head higher, taking in the scenery. He was no longer the defeated horse left to die in the snow. He was surviving, healing. As they pulled up to the cabin, Claire opened the truck and carefully guided Blaze down. He sniffed the air, stepping slowly onto the soft earth. His ears twitched at the sounds of birds and rustling leaves. Claire led him to his new shelter, watching him explore. "Welcome home," she said softly. Days at the cabin settled into a comforting rhythm. Claire spent her mornings tending to Blaze, brushing his now growing winter coat and checking his healing wounds. She talked to him constantly, sharing stories about her life in the forest and her work rescuing animals. Blaze listened, his eyes soft and aware. Each day, he took more steps on his own, exploring the fenced pasture behind the cabin. Claire watched proudly as his strength returned. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Blaze did something unexpected. Claire was stacking firewood when she heard the rhythmic thud of hooves. She turned to see Blaze trotting across the pasture, his mane catching the wind. Not struggling, not limping, running. Claire dropped the wood, her breath catching. For a moment, Blaze was the wild, untamed Mustang he was born to be. He circled the pasture, kicking up snow, before slowing and turning toward Claire. Their eyes met, and in that look, there was understanding, freedom, strength, trust. Claire approached him slowly, reaching out to gently touch his muzzle. "Look at you," she whispered. "You're unstoppable." Later that week, Claire and Blaze ventured beyond the pasture. She led him along the forest trails, each step bringing them deeper into the heart of the wilderness. The air was crisp, but the forest was alive with the sounds of rustling leaves and distant bird calls. Blaze moved confidently now, his ears alert, his steps steady. At a clearing overlooking a frozen lake, Claire paused. Blaze stood beside her, the wind tugging at his mane. "This is your world now," Claire said softly. "No ropes, no fear. Just you." Blaze let out a deep, contented breath, his body relaxed yet ready to run. And run he would. Weeks passed, and winter slowly began to loosen its icy grip. The snow started melting, revealing patches of earth and the early signs of spring. Blaze had transformed. His once weak frame now carried strength, and his coat, once dull and tangled, gleamed in the soft sunlight. Every step he took was steady, full of purpose. Claire watched him from the porch, her hands wrapped around a warm mug of tea. Blaze moved freely around the fenced pasture, no longer confined by fear or weakness. He had become a symbol of resilience. Yet, as proud as she was of his progress, Claire knew Blaze wasn't just meant to recover, he was meant to live. One afternoon, Claire made a decision. She led Blaze beyond the familiar pasture and into the open fields that stretched toward the horizon. The air was crisp, and the sky was a brilliant blue. Blaze hesitated at first, glancing back at Claire. "You can go," she whispered, loosening the lead rope. "No more cages, no more ropes." Blaze stood still for a moment, processing the space in front of him. Then, without warning, he bolted forward, kicking up snow and dirt. His powerful legs carried him across the open field, faster and freer than Claire had ever seen. She laughed, tears filling her eyes. "That's it, Blaze, run!" He ran for what felt like miles, mane flying, hooves thundering against the earth. For a fleeting moment, Blaze was the wild Mustang he was always meant to be. No fences, no pain, just freedom. But then, something unexpected happened. Blaze slowed, turning back toward Claire. His ears perked, and he let out a soft huff. Slowly, he trotted back to her side. Claire knelt, smiling as he nuzzled her shoulder. "You're free, but you still choose me," she whispered. Blaze's loyalty wasn't bound by fear or control. It was built on trust. The next few days were filled with quiet joy. Claire and Blaze explored trails together, each adventure strengthening their bond. Blaze grew bolder, venturing farther but always returning. His spirit had healed, and now it soared. But Claire couldn't ignore the question lingering in her heart. Was Blaze truly meant to stay here forever? One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the landscape, Claire sat on the porch deep in thought. Blaze stood near the fence, watching the wind ripple through the trees. Dr. Harper's words echoed in her mind. Mustangs are wild by nature, it's in their blood. Claire sighed. Are you meant to stay, Blaze, or are you meant to run free? A few days later, Claire drove into town to pick up supplies. While at the feed store, she overheard a conversation between two ranchers about a nearby wildlife reserve that had started accepting rescued wild horses for rehabilitation and release. Her heart stirred. Maybe that was Blaze's true path. Claire visited the reserve that week. It was vast, stretching across rolling hills and open plains. Horses roamed freely, grazing in the distance. Claire spoke with the handlers, explaining Blaze's journey. He'd be welcome here, one of them said kindly. Mustangs belong to the wild. We help them find their way back. Claire nodded slowly. She wanted what was best for Blaze, even if it meant letting go. That evening, Claire sat beside Blaze in the pasture. She ran her hand along his strong neck. I think it's time, she said softly. You were born to run, Blaze, not to be fenced in. Blaze nudged her hand gently as if understanding. Claire smiled, though her heart ached. We'll do this together. The following week, Claire loaded Blaze into the trailer for one last journey. The drive was quiet, filled with unspoken emotion. When they arrived at the reserve, the handlers greeted them warmly. Claire led Blaze to the gate that opened into the endless fields. She unclipped the lead rope. For a moment, Blaze stood still, the wind brushing through his mane. Then, slowly, he stepped forward, crossing the threshold into the wild. Claire watched as he paused, looking back at her one last time. She smiled through her tears. Go on. Blaze turned and galloped into the open fields, joining a distant herd. His figure became smaller, merging with the horizon. And just like that, he was free. The wind whispered softly through the open plains as Blaze disappeared into the horizon, his powerful stride blending with the distant herd. Claire stood at the edge of the reserve, watching until she could no longer see him. The ache in her chest was deep, but it wasn't painful. It was bittersweet. A soft smile tugged at her lips. You're finally where you belong. She wiped a tear from her cheek, taking a deep breath of the crisp air. The stillness of the landscape was peaceful, almost sacred. Blaze was free, but the bond they shared would never be broken. The following days felt quieter, emptier. The cabin no longer echoed with the soft sounds of Blaze moving around, and the pastures sat still under the early spring sun. Yet, Claire found comfort in the emptiness. She spent her days tending to the land, walking the trails she once explored with Blaze. Every breeze that rustled through the trees, every distant echo of hooves on the ground reminded her of him. But Claire wasn't alone. The community, touched by Blaze's story, rallied around her. Donations to the local animal rescue flooded in, and more people volunteered their time to help abandoned and mistreated animals. Blaze's story had become more than just a tale of survival. It had become a movement of compassion. Dr. Harper stopped by one afternoon, bringing supplies for the small shelter Claire had started building next to her cabin. You're turning this place into a refuge, Dr. Harper said, watching as Claire hammered in the last wooden beam. Claire smiled softly. Blaze showed me there's more I can do. Months later, Claire returned to the reserve. She stood by the fence, scanning the distant hills. Herds of Mustangs grazed peacefully. And then she saw him, Blaze. His silver coat shimmered in the sunlight, his mane flowing in the breeze. Strong, wild, free. Claire's heart swelled as she watched him lift his head, as if sensing her presence. For a moment he stood still, their eyes meeting across the vast field. Then, with a proud toss of his head, Blaze turned and galloped toward the horizon. Claire laughed softly, a tear sliding down her cheek. Run free, my friend. That night, back at the cabin, Claire sat on the porch under a sky scattered with stars. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the distant sounds of the wild. She closed her eyes and smiled. Blaze was out there, living, thriving, running beneath the same stars. And somehow, that was enough. If Blaze's incredible journey touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Every act of kindness makes a difference. Let's continue to stand up for those who can't speak for themselves.